So I want to welcome you all to the 4th annual Cell and Gene Therapy Investor Day. My name is Morrie Ruffin. I'm the co-founder and managing director of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and we're really delighted to have all of you here today. I just want to mention a few things at the outset. We can only do this because we have great partners working with us, and I want to acknowledge our bank partners and sponsors, Piper Jaffray and Maxim, and also BioLife, another major sponsor of the event. So we really appreciate all their support for this event. So many of you are familiar with this now, having done this with us for a few years, in the 4th year. This is a different type of meeting. We try and really delve deep into the issues around cell and gene therapy and regenerative medicine. So we have a program really designed to do that today with a number of panels, and then you're going to hear from companies throughout the course of the day. What I want to do is just start things off with just a little bit of information as background. First, really to mention our organization, the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. So we pride ourselves as the leading advocacy organization representing this space, that's cell and gene therapy companies and regenerative medicine companies. And our mission is really dedicated to advancing the science, the research and development, and eventual commercialization of products in this sector. And we do this through a very comprehensive advocacy program focused in the U.S., but also in Europe. We have offices in Brussels, and I mentioned Brussels today because of those of you who watched the news today. Unfortunately, we saw some very sad news again coming out of Europe, and our thoughts are really with all of our colleagues there. But we really want to focus on the positive today, and I think there is a lot of positive coming out of this sector, and you're going to hear about it throughout the course of the day. So this sector is really a global industry, and we count companies, 670 odd companies and more, really throughout the world. Obviously, the majority of them in the U.S. and Europe, but obviously also a huge presence in Asia. And as an organization and an industry, we really work with everyone. As I mentioned, we have our operations both in the U.S. and Europe, but we have strong relationships in Japan and Australia and elsewhere as well. And we're all focused on advancing the science and moving these products through the clinic and to the patient. So the important metrics we have to pay attention to really have a lot to do with how we're performing in the clinic. And one of the things that we as an organization are trying to do is track this year to year. So this is data that we have been compiling with our partner Informa, really tracking the clinical performance in the sector. And again, you're going to hear a lot about this today in various presentations, but important to note the number of products moving into late-stage clinical development in phase 2 and phase 3, and then hopefully a number of registrations and approvals. The disease areas that we will be talking about today, obviously oncology has garnered a lot of attention, and the panel that will follow this, chaired by our chairman, Edward Lanfear, will focus on that sector. But just to remind you that there are really a number of different disease areas that this industry is committed to addressing. And again, many of the companies here today will be talking about cardiovascular disease, ophthalmology, various rare diseases and rare metabolic disorders. So really across the board, you'll see the progress that we're making with gene and cell therapy. And so because this is an investor event, I think one of the things we also need to be thinking about is what's going to drive this, the interest in this sector. And a lot of it will depend upon the data that we can report out. And this is data coming from clinical trials, regulatory approvals, et cetera. And so this slide is just a reminder of a number of the major data events from last year in the gene and cell therapy space. Obviously a lot more than we could just fit on this slide. And I do want to mention that this is all information that we have on the ARM website. So if you want to access this information and you can't read the slides here, you can certainly get it there. And also we're looking forward to a number of data events this year in 2016 in this space, and including product approvals. So again, a number of companies will be addressing this today and talking about some of these upcoming events. Notably, the work that Spark is doing in rare eye diseases, and then we expect an approval, hopefully, for the ADA SCID therapy that GSK is seeking approval for in Europe, and then many, many others as well. So these two slides list some of them, again, not all of them, and you can find this information on our website. So again, because this is an investor event, I think it's important to talk about a little bit about the financial performance in the sector. We have a panel at lunch today with a couple of investors who will no doubt be talking about this. But even though the markets have been in a bit of a swoon lately, and we certainly experienced that and are all too familiar with it from the final quarter of last year and the beginning of this year, it is important, though, still to acknowledge the success that was 2015. So this was really a watershed year for the sector in terms of the amount of money raised. Almost 2x, actually more than twice what was raised in the prior year, which was also a very big year for the sector. So I think what's important to note here is that this is money that is coming in not just to pay for research, but also clinical development. So these are companies that 4 or 5 years ago would have had a very difficult time raising this money. Now they have it, and they're raising rather large sums, as you will see. So if you break it down in terms of the types of financing, really across the board, all sources of financing were up last year. I'll note, both in terms of the performance of the IPO market, but then really also the corporate partnerships. So this is something that we have been talking about as an organization for a long time. And I think, again, you'll hear about this, but this is an important, very, very important signal of, I think, the growing interest and confidence in this sector, with a large amount of money coming into the sector from large pharma and large cap biotech companies. And I mentioned the IPOs, and so there were, of course, a number of them last year. We have more than we could obviously fit on this slide. These are just a few of note. I think one thing that we certainly want to recognize here is the amount of money that's being raised. So it's not just how they perform initially, but the amount of money that they're bringing into these companies, most of them raising more than $100 million. And the partnerships, too, are very substantial. And this is something that, again, we talked about for a number of years. I remember when Cephalon did their deal with Mesoblast 6 or 7 years ago, and everybody said, oh, we'll never see deals this size again. Well, here they are, and there were a number of them last year. And again, the important thing is look at the amount of money being raised by these companies, look at the upfront payments, and obviously the milestones. So again, a significant amount of cash flowing into these companies to finance their clinical development. And again, we'll be thinking about or talking about clinical data events for this year. So this slide just describes those that were happening in the first couple of quarters of this year. I also mentioned one of the financings. I think many of you are familiar with Editas and their successful IPO earlier this year, where again they raised over $100 million. So even despite the challenges in the market, there are parts of the sector that are really continuing to perform. So with that setting the stage, what I would like to do is invite our chairman and the CEO of Sangamo, Edward Lanfear, to take the stage and invite up the first panel. Edward?